in my yeast protocol, I tell people to avoid sugar, gluten, and dairy for about 3 weeks and then start back on maybe some fruit. Oh, well, yeah, I tell them to avoid fruit and then start back on 1 or 2 pieces of fruit a day. But in the midst of that, I'm telling them to take the picometer silver and the
Mm.
natural antifungal, which is a Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a probiotic and a gentle antifungal.
So thank
That
you so much, and Carolyn Dean, for coming back to the show. It's so lovely to have you on here every time. I really enjoy it.
yes, we have fun.
Yeah, it's always
And yeah,
nice.
there's a lot of simpatico going on because you want to educate people about health and give them like simple solutions. I mean, it doesn't have to be so complex.
Mm.
Sometimes it just bothers me so much but there are a percentage of people, or there is a percentage of people who want the complexity. They want to know the studies and everything. But back in 2008, I have been doing an online wellness series, 108 modules through, it must have been a 2 year endeavor. But in 2008, when the economy crashed here in the US, people just wrote to me and said, I don't even have time to read what you say, let alone do what you say. You
Mm.
know, all the hacks and tips to make people, walk more, exercise more, eat better, unplug at night, all the basic things. But some people just started saying, look, just tell me what to do, tell me what to take. It became about supplements.
Mm.
But it's not just you take a supplement, you have to look at your diet, and that's where the yeast overgrowth comes in because we've gotten so sugar addicted and antibiotic addicted, let's say, mercury in our teeth, that it acts like an antibiotic and kills off good and bad bacteria. And that's what antibiotics do. And then in the vacuum from killing off those bacteria, yeast will migrate from the large intestine into the small intestine. And that's the whole dilemma, because in the small intestine, the yeast buds turn into threads, and these threads poke holes in the small intestine, in the lining. And then the yeast toxins, of which there are about 78, I found that out through some mold research, the cross reactivity of mold and yeast toxins. So these toxins get absorbed through the bloodstream and cause head to toe symptoms. And I mean, I could list them actually, Tamara. I'm doing a yeast talk here in the next couple of days, and we have uh, the yeast questionnaire that Dr. Crook, William Crook, do you know that name?
I don't know.
So William Crook and Orion Truss, both medical doctors, in the mid 80s, they both wrote books about yeast overgrowth. They didn't call it that, but they called it, excuse me, candidiasis syndrome or yeast infection or whatever. And they both had found in their clinical practices that their patients who were taking antibiotics or eating a lot of sugar were getting all kinds of symptoms. And what Dr. Crook did is he listed things like antibiotics for a month or longer, broad spectrum antibiotics for 2 months, broad spectrum antibiotics even one time, persistent prostatitis and vaginitis, memory or concentration or feeling spaced out, problems with memory concentration. Do you feel sick all the time or sick all over? Have you been pregnant? Have you taken birth control pills? So this is the history of someone who could have yeast overgrowth. Have you taken steroids? Do you get symptoms when you are exposed to perfumes, insecticides, fabric shop odors, and other chemicals? Are
Mm,
you bothered by tobacco smoke? Are you worse on damp, muggy days or in moldy places?
mm.
Do you have athlete's foot, ringworm, jock itch, fungal infection of the skin or nails? And do you crave sugar? I mean, look at all
That's a
that.
huge, and it just shows that the yeast, once it overgrows in the wrong place in the body, it can affect every single system in your body. So when people think of yeast, they think, oh, thrush, or they think, oh, athlete's foot, but they don't actually make the connection between all of those other symptoms. So things like urine infections and like feeling spaced out, like you said, headaches, gas, bloating. It can cause so many things because it starts in the gut, right? And then it kind of spreads to all the systems in your body. So someone can feel really terrible and feel like something's wrong and have no idea what's going on with them. They can go to the doctor and the doctor can give them some medication for their symptoms, but
Mhm.
they won't actually look into the actual cause of the symptoms. So it's a real problem for so many women. I mean, in your book that you wrote about yeast, it's a fabulous book, and you give so many cases of women that you've dealt with who
Mhm.
have had cases of yeast overgrowth. And it's just crazy what these women have gone through. But I'm sure the listeners maybe have experienced or are experiencing just this feeling of something being wrong, but they just don't know what it is, and no one can tell them. So can you give me some examples of yeast overgrowth? So I mean, people think thrush and then they think like athlete's foot, but what other kind of examples of yeast overgrowth would someone recognize if they're listening to this and they're like, oh, do I have it? I mean, I know you've given a bunch of symptoms there, but is there anything that you've come across most commonly that someone should look out for?
Brain fog is one. And you
Yes.
see the layers we have to look at, Tamara. If you're talking about the gut and we're saying, oh, yeast will infiltrate, the good and bad bacteria kind of are pushed aside. Well, aren't those good and bad bacteria, the microbiome, important for neurotransmitters, for serotonin, for the immune system? So if you're interfering with the gut, already you've got a weakened immune system, you've got the neurotransmitter problem, which is kind of the brain fog problem, and with the toxins that are formed by yeast, we've got alcohols. We've got people who will be tested with a breathalyzer because they're just, looks like they're drunk.
Feeling drunk. Right.
They'll test positive on a breathalyzer because yeast makes alcohol as a byproduct. And they'll swear up and down they haven't touched alcohol. You've got acetaldehyde, which is a byproduct of yeast, just yeast metabolism. Acetaldehyde can injure any tissue in your body. It's very dangerous. It's a byproduct also of cigarette smoking and car exhaust. So we've got some very strong chemicals that are being made that are going to affect the brain and all the tissues in the body. So boom, 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 you've got all that happening, and no one, as you say, no one is aware, either the individual or the doctor, what's going on. And I just mentioned the history of what could be causing yeast. But in Dr. Crook's candida questionnaire that people can Google and find, I do have it in my Kindle book, and we've got 23 major symptoms. And, I know it's boring to list symptoms, but people really should know. We're talking about fatigue, lethargy, feeling of being drained, depression or manic depression, numbness, burning, or tingling in the extremities mostly, headaches, muscle aches, muscle weakness, paralysis, pain, and swelling in the joints, abdominal pain, constipation, or diarrhea, bloating, belching, or gas, vaginal burning, itching, or discharge, and prostatitis. And I haven't finished.
It's just goes on and on.
Impotence, loss of sexual desire, endometriosis, infertility, cramps, and menstrual irregularities, premenstrual tension, anxiety, crying attacks, cold hands and feet, low body temperature, hypothyroidism, shaking or irritability when hungry, cystitis or interstitial cystitis. That's the major
Mm.
symptoms. And there's 33 minor symptoms, but we'll stop there. But
Yeah, it's
it,
crazy. I mean, how prevalent is this? Because you've just described probably nearly every woman that I know. Like that, every woman that I know has at least one of those symptoms. So, like, how prevalent is this? Is this something that's not very common, or is it something that literally more women have it than you think?
oh yeah, definitely, because
Mm.
we're in a fast food society. We eat a lot of sugar. I do. I eat mostly fruit sugar, and I was very susceptible to yeast. In in my childhood, I had a lot of antibiotics, and then of course I had mercury fillings. I was addicted to sugar, and I think I had a coated tongue. I didn't have acne or anything from the sugar, so I didn't even, consider sugar was a problem until I started getting into natural health in my teens, and that saved my life.
Mm.
When I was in medical train school, I guess it would be first year that we got into the hospitals, I developed nasal boils, little tiny boils in my nostrils, staphylococcal bacteria, rampant in hospitals. And it wasn't until after my medical training, I went into my naturopathic um, school that I realized that I had yeast that made me susceptible to getting bacterial infections. And I used to have a lot of viral infections too. So I began to develop this theory that yeast overgrowth is very common. It's could be the underlying cause for a lot of chronic disease because it distracts our immune system by trying to deal with all these toxins and this irritation, and it leads people to the doctor where they're given more medications, more antibiotics.
Making it
I
worse. Yeah.
I had a 8-month-old child in my practice up in Toronto, a family practice, and he had chronic ear infections, 8 months old, and he'd been on antibiotics since he was born. And the mother said to me, because she knew that I was interested in yeast, she was a nurse. She said, his ears smell yeasty and no one will listen to me. And she described how she had yeast vaginitis when he was born. She thinks he right away got yeast in his ears and had these infections that were then misdiagnosed, and he was given more antibiotics. This is happening. So we treated her for yeast, and she was still breastfeeding, and whatever we did, his ear infections cleared up.
Mm.
So we've got it is rampant, and it is related to chronic disease. And what I've seen in certain drugs like metformin and the statins and some of the drugs that we're saying are anti-aging, um, there's a bacteria that they found on Easter Island that they're saying, oh, this is the cat's meow. All these drugs are antifungals, Tamara.
Right.
All these medications have an antifungal component, and no one is talking about that. I learned this from my late friend Roby Mitchell. He was a MD, PhD, former Marine who would do these experiments, and he put these. I don't know how he'd do them, but I guess he'd get some yeast culture and throw on different drugs. And he said it is amazing how many medications are antifungal. So that's partly how they're working. So he and I developed this consideration that Yeast is ubiquitous. It's natural to our large intestine. It does things in our large intestine that are helpful. It helps to digest food that never got completely digested in the small intestine, so it gets rid of it. It's like mold in the forest. You know, when a tree falls over, it's chewed up by funguses and molds and everything. If fungi did not chew up that sort of debris, you know, we would be covered in debris. It has to break down. So anyway, yeast has a place in the large intestine, but
We
not
need
in.
it. It's natural. Like it when it's in balance, it's completely natural and present in all of us. But it's when it has an opportunity to overgrow and kind of step out of line and go to places where it shouldn't. So you said in the beginning, for example, it should be in the large intestine, but then when it gets an opportunity to grow into the small intestine, that's when you can get unpleasant symptoms and that's when it can start to kind of spread. Can you just make some definitions here? Because I'm always confused myself when it says, when you say candida, yeast, fungi, what is the difference between all of these things? What are they?
Mm. So fungi and yeast are like cousins.
Mm,
And it's like interchangeable in how we
mm,
talk about it, because when you talk about drugs to treat Candida albicans, a yeast, you talk about antifungal drugs. So you would say that the fungi are the species, and then the Candida albicans would be a subspecies, something of that nature. And then mold, fungus and mold are also cousins. I'm
right.
not getting it completely right, but they're all related. And as I noted in the list of the history, you can go into a like a moldy basement and just smell it and it
Yeah.
irritates your nostrils if you're already yeast sensitive. I would see patients who'd come in with all the symptoms of yeast, and it turned out that they'd had a recent water leak in their house or whatever, and it had gone moldy, and they had gotten symptoms from the mold that just exacerbated their yeast. And in the immune system situation where I say the yeast toxins, they're weakening the immune system because they every time you have a foreign body in the bloodstream, the immune system has to take care of it.
Mm,
And what we noticed in my dietary supplement company is people who just started using my picometer stabilized ionic magnesium, their immune system would rev up to the extent that after a couple of months of saying, "Oh, I feel so great, this is wonderful, I'm sleeping, I have no headaches," and all the rest of it, then they'd be calling up customer service and saying, "I don't know what's going on. You know, I have this skin rash, or my gut is all upset and I have a coated tongue." And I'd already trained the customer service staff to recognize that as yeast overgrowth and yeast being killed off and the immune system working now to remove the yeast. And all we do is explain this to people and then put them on my silver and natural antifungals so that they could really get the yeast back in balance. So it was just so common. It is incredible. So I don't know what's going to happen in the yeast world, because in alternative medicine, they've turned the symptoms of yeast overgrowth into small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
mm.
It's,
SIBO.
it's yeah, it
Mm,
seems that allopathic medicine and even alternative medicine is not interested in yeast overgrowth or treating it. And I think it's partly because you do have to pay some attention to the diet. I know in my life, I spent 10 years avoiding sugar, wheat, and dairy. Back then, we just said wheat. Now we're saying avoid sugar, gluten, and dairy. And
mm,
it really didn't make a big enough change until I started using my magnesium and my other products and the and created this antifungal because it's like a daily uh, fight. It's a daily war against this organism that just eats off our carbohydrates and sugars.
Yeah.
So I realized, well, maybe we can't just kind of detox every few months and get rid of our yeast and go back to whatever we ate before. What I say now is, eat a moderately healthy diet and yeah, have your fruit, have a dessert here and there. Try not to be so terrorized by your diet because that's what I
That can
experienced for
cause
10
other
years.
issues as well. I always think when I'm dealing with my clients, if a client has insatiable carbohydrate or sugar cravings, so to me, that's a big sign. Like when they have those cravings, I think, and then I'll take a look at their other symptoms and think, okay, maybe this is a yeast problem.
Mhm.
Because the sugar and the carbohydrates, can you just talk us through what the connection is there between sugar and carbohydrates and yeast? And what causes those cravings and what will make it almost impossible for them to stick to a low sugar diet if they're, if they have yeast overgrowth.
This is where I bring in the Borg in Star Trek. I don't know, you're probably too young to have followed Star Trek, but there was something called the Borg, which was I don't know, a species where everybody had the same mind, everybody was connected, the same mindset, or they shared a mind. So the Borg feeling with yeast is that they want to eat carbohydrates, mostly sugar, and they will do anything for them. So your yeast is creating your craving.
That's
And
fascinating when you say that. Like, it's like, gosh, these aren't even my cravings. It's the
I-
yeast cravings. Right.
it is. And with carbohydrates, what happens, the body's trying to break down the food in our diet into sugar and fat and amino acid proteins. So it will break down that piece of bread, which it's made of chains of glucose. So just break it up. Okay, there's glucose. With lactose, that's a milk sugar. So it will become eventually a glucose that your insulin can help transport to your cells to be able to be metabolized in the Krebs cycle or the glycolysis cycle first and then the Krebs cycle to make energy. That's all we're doing all day, every day. And what's very interesting about sugar and vitamin C is they are both compete for transport on insulin.
Mm.
And that is kind of scary because what we've got, if we have high sugar in the blood and low vitamin C is never going to get into the cell. Preferentially, the insulin will grab the glucose and push it into cells. And when it keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, and the cell is filled up, that's where you start to get insulin resistance and the whole diabetic business. And all the while, that excess sugar in the cell is not allowing vitamin C in. And vitamin C is crucial to get into the cells to act as an antioxidant to deal with the waste material that's created in the energy making process. So this is
That
huge.
explains fatigue,
So that's
tiredness.
yeah, that's your immune system getting weakened in that very biochemical way. And then, furthermore, in the cell where you have all this glucose and there's too much to go through the glycolysis cycle and the Krebs cycle, it turns into sorbitol, which is like a crystal that can't go anywhere else. It's stuck in the cell. And if you get a lot of sorbitol building up, then that cell will die. If it's a nerve cell, then you start getting the numbness and tingling of various parts of your body, which is then, oh, these are diabetic symptoms. They are a buildup of sugar, turns into sorbitol, kills the cell. So I started refining all this information recently because I'm updating my sugar book, and it's incredible how much sugar is part of our diet, and we don't even have a clue about how dangerous it is, and how even the diabetic industry, they've gotten to the point where, well, we know we can't stop people eating sugar. We'll just give them more drugs. And if they can't maintain their blood sugar levels with the drugs, we'll give them shots of insulin. And they make people feel like, oh, just take your drugs, don't worry about diet. And that's partly because in allopathic medicine, we never learned anything about diet. It was like, oh, send them off to a dietitian. So we're in a real dilemma right now where there is the information that lets you know, okay, yeah, moderate sugar, treat your yeast overgrowth. It's part of the whole chronic disease epidemic.
Mm. So, what are your thoughts on someone switching to, let's say, a carnivore or a ketogenic diet? Because in my practice, when someone has sugar cravings, I think, okay, maybe there's a yeast thing going on, maybe there's a blood sugar roller coasters happening. And when someone is in the grips of sugar addiction, it's so difficult for them to come off that roller coaster.
Right.
I like to take them towards a low carbohydrate diet because I know that that will help solve their problems if they were to get there and if they were to be happy there. But
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that? So taking someone from a high sugar diet, feeding the yeast, and then what sort of diet would you like to see them go on to from there?
Right. I guess my philosophy has changed over the years because, as I said, I used to think I had to starve my yeast by starving myself. When I got into the dietary supplement business, because I had such severe magnesium deficiency, I had to create a non-laxative magnesium. And then that led me to multiple that help support the thyroid and on and on and on. What I have found is the best way to work with people is to give them the proper building blocks of the nutrients and supplements, and then they get enough energy to make some dietary shifts.
That's interesting. So you say add in first, add in the essential nutrients, minerals, and then start to transition into a new way of eating.
You cannot say to someone who's already suffering and has, what, 23 major symptoms and 33 minor symptoms of yeast overgrowth and say, well, stop eating all these things.
Yeah, you're right.
You're depriving people and you're just making them feel less than. You make them feel guilty because they can't, because they're craving sugar to get the energy, but they could get their sugar from healthier sources. In terms of diet, I mean, the carnivore diet or even the strict vegan diet, what they are is detox diets. They are detoxing you from the sugars and the grains and even the beans and lentils, the lectin foods. These are detox diets, and people feel good in the beginning. I don't know how long you can continue. I don't know if the blood type diet factors in. I know I'm a O blood group, and every time I try to eat off my farm entirely, as a vegetarian, it's impossible. So everybody is different.
Mm.
And in the vegan world, one of my foster kids, my foster daughter, she was a vegan for I think 20 years, and I didn't fight her on it, but it wasn't until she started losing teeth that she realized that her body wasn't adapting to it. She didn't have enough protein to make the soft tissue that held her teeth in her head. So, or the bones, or, whatever. And Tamara, she had insomnia for like 18 years of her 20 years of being a vegan. So that was an effect that shifted as soon as she went to animal protein. So you can take the extremes. I preferred the keto, which is a little bit in
Oh,
between.
so you were on the keto
I
to
was
help you overcome the yeast?
not
Not
really.
really.
Um, I overcame the yeast when I started working with my silver and
Right. Okay.
anti-fungal.
Yeah.
And I cut back on my fruit as well because when I moved to Maui, it was like, oh, I had fruit weight gain and fruit yeast overgrowth. So I did that experiment.
Yeah.
So with the keto diet, I was looking to reduce, I wanted to lose 5 pounds. So the keto was helpful for that. But you know what most so then I did keto for a couple of years and then I drifted into more carbohydrates.
Mm.
And what I found for weight loss was one day I'll eat a normal diet, which is only 2 meals a day. With my dietary supplements, I find that I'm getting the nutrients that I'm supposed to get from food. We eat more and more calories because our bodies feel deprived. We're not getting enough nutrients, so we keep eating. This is
Right.
what part of weight gain.
I mean, it's
So with
interesting
mine,
when you say that because when you look at somebody who's overweight,
Mhm.
that the assumption would be, oh, they have lots of nutrients, like they've been eating a lot of food, so therefore they must have everything they need and like and then some. But really, the opposite is true. The reason why someone is drawn to so much food is because their body is searching for those nutrients, but they can't find it in the food. So it's that just came to mind when you mentioned that.
Yeah, yes, the one ultra processed food study that's been done, and that it was a number of years ago. They put two groups of people, one on, a standard, not so good diet anyway, and one on an ultra refined processed diet. And they found that the highly processed food diet, those people all ate 500 calories more than the other diet. And they couldn't figure out why. And at a conference once, I got up and said, well, it's because they're starving for nutrients and they're looking for calories. And I was poo-pooed. But they had shock in their faces. So this is how bad nutrition research is right now. They just don't even have common sense. So what I found personally, I have this silly diet where I'll eat an avocado, a boiled egg, an orange or a big tangerine, and my protein powder. And that's all I'll eat in one day. And the other day I'll do the 2 meals. It'll be cod or salmon or chicken or beef or lamb. I'm into protein, and I'll have some vegetables from the farm.
Mhm.
I might have occasionally some rice.
And I
And
presume that yeast, you haven't had a struggle with yeast for many years
correct.
living that way.
And if I do have, I travel or, birthday party, a lot of sugar, I will get a nasal boil.
Straight
Will get
away. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's like if I miss a day of my magnesium, I might get a leg cramp. So it reminds me of, uh-oh, uh-oh.
Do you know what's interesting? I believe that I can have issues with yeast because over the years I can get brain fog and I can get rashes, especially on my fingers. Like I always know when I need to fix my diet because I get kind of almost like eczema on my fingers. And as soon as I change my diet for the better, that goes away straight away. So I love having that control. But I remember when I was in my early 20s, before I knew anything about nutrition, I I remember I had these constant kind of bouts of thrush, like it would just come and go, come and go. And reading through your yeast book, it made me realize, oh my God, it was kind of shortly after I went on the birth control pill, and birth control pills can cause yeast overgrowth. And I didn't make that connection back then. But then I was given antibiotics to treat it. And so
Mm.
I was kind of in and out of the thrush. And eventually that period went away in my life. But yeah, I definitely struggled with that.
Well, that's a perfect example of what happens to someone. Symptoms that the doctor doesn't recognize as yeast, treats with antibiotics, makes it worse. And yes, that was part of my picture too, because I was on the birth control pill for 10 years. And it affects your hormone. Well, you're taking a daily hormone, and the hormones do feed yeast, but also the birth control pill will diminish your zinc. And zinc is very important for the skin and for your immune system. So that's working against a person as well. I never learned in medical school, and it's very sad to see how many people are misdiagnosed. I mean, seriously, 23 major symptoms, 33 minor symptoms of yeast overgrowth. And people just don't really have any idea what's going on.
So you've spoken about some of the like medications, for example, can be a cause of yeast overgrowth. You've been talking about your magnesium and some of your supplements. So I want to go into that side of things because nutrient deficiency can be another cause of yeast overgrowth. So can we talk about magnesium now? Because you are the magnesium woman. We've talked about magnesium in two previous episodes. You've got one book and you've got another book before that as well, which is another bestseller. Uh, you're showing it now. Let's have a look. Yes, so the Magnesium Miracle and the Magnesium, the Missing Link to Total Health, they're just excellent books. And I love your magnesium supplement, by the way. I take it every single day.
Well,
So can I just ask then, magnesium, when you type in magnesium and yeast overgrowth online, there is a connection there, like having magnesium deficiency and yeast
right.
overgrowth. So can you talk us through that?
Well, I think I mentioned when people take the magnesium for a couple of months, not everybody, of course, but some people experience rashes, intestinal problems, itching, itchy ears, itchy eyes. And we say it's because the magnesium is supporting the immune system and its ability to get rid of the excess yeast. Yeast, because it's part of the natural and normal environment of the body, it's like what I call a stealth pathogen. It 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 is recognized by the immune system as being normal to the body. And the immune system kind of has to wake up to the fact that, oh, there's too much. And I see that magnesium, by working its way through the different enzyme systems and pathways, magnesium is necessary for 80% of known metabolic functions, and it's working on 600 to 800 different enzyme systems. In the literature, you'll see even today people say, oh, it's 300, 325 enzyme systems. I noticed that some people are now starting to come out and quote the literature that I've been quoting and say, well, actually there's 600. So 80% of known metabolic functions, it's going to hit the immune system. And what you can do is look at, oh, glutathione, that's an antioxidant that supports the immune system. Oh, magnesium is important for helping glutathione production. So, or superoxide dismutase. You look at all these antioxidant substances or molecules, and you check the enzymes and the cofactors, and magnesium often pops up. So I guess that's what I'd say about magnesium. It's not something that anybody even considers, but it's just common sense to me, and I see it clinically. As I said, people, when their immune system perks up and they have energy and all the rest of it, they will start experiencing yeast overgrowth die-off.
Mm.
So it's this die-off, that's Herxheimer, that we're looking at. And actually, what's interesting when I say that, Tamara, is when you use a picometer silver, which is part of the yeast protocol, silver works in such a way that it prevents the Herxheimer die-off reaction.
Really? And that's why you have it in the Yeast bundle, because you have the silver, you have a like a probiotic, and then you have a like a multivitamin with lots of B vitamins. So that's
Hmm.
that's the Yeast bundle that you have. So the
Right.
silver is for controlling the die-off symptoms. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. What are the
Yeah.
die-off symptoms? Well, what would someone expect to find? Just say they start to take on an anti-yeast protocol, which we can go through after this. Just
Right.
say it starts to work and they start to feel worse and they start to think, God, this isn't working. Ugh, I feel even worse. Why are they feeling worse when it's working?
Because the yeast are dying off, and as they die off, they're the 78 different toxins that are part of the yeast cycle, they just flood the system. So you have worse brain fog and worse irritation of every area in your body. I mean, I used to get ear itching.
Mm. Headaches is a big one.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that could be from the aldehydes or the alcohol. I mean, when, well, I haven't drunk alcohol in a long time, but it's like being hungover, having alcohol and aldehydes. So your system is just flooded with all these yeast toxins that come about when you're killing the yeast or when your immune system is coming after the yeast.
Mm.
And and it will just stop people in their tracks and they say, I can't take this. And they just go back to their regular diet. The same can happen when people are on a strict weight loss diet and they avoid, sugar, wheat, and dairy, and they feel worse. And that can be because toxins are stored in fat cells, and when the fat cells break down and are eliminated, those toxins will flood the bloodstream, and people just feel horrible.
For how long is it normal to feel so terrible after this?
It's hard to say because if people don't look at the whole picture and continue to eat badly while they're doing some sort of treatment, then they can drag it out. But if people in my yeast protocol, I tell people to avoid sugar, gluten, and dairy for about 3 weeks and then start back on maybe some fruit. Oh, well, yeah, I tell them to avoid fruit and then start back on 1 or 2 pieces of fruit a day. But in the midst of that, I'm telling them to take the picometer silver and the natural antifungal, which is a Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a probiotic and a gentle antifungal that they have numerous studies using it for childhood and infant diarrhea. So it's very gentle. And then I have humic fulvic, which is a prebiotic, probiotic kind of mineral soil that there are some companies, their whole product line is humic fulvic for Pete's sakes, because it's so powerful.
Mm.
So with that combination, then people are in control of their diet and their health.
So just say somebody is listening to this and they say, "Oh my gosh, those are my symptoms. What if I have a yeast problem? Maybe I should get started on like a yeast protocol." So you kind of touched on the diet that you recommend just then. So can we kind of go into that a little bit more? So just say somebody can, research some supplements to take to put nutrition back into their diet. And, your supplements are a good solution for that. They can just go online and find them. So at the same time, diet, can you just go into what sort of diet they could start to dabble in and start to kind of go into?
Right, it does end up being more of a animal based, because carbohydrates will feed the yeast.
Mm.
So, and even, a very high protein diet. I have some concern about the carnivore diet because at a certain point where the body doesn't need all those amino acids, it can actually make glucose out of protein. And people don't realize that. So I have concerns, how they talk about the macro diets and, oh, you
Mm,
have to have 100 grams of protein a day. I mean, I only have like 20 to 30 grams.
yeah.
So the body is always going to try to balance out something extreme. So I try not to be extreme.
And
It
you
could
said
be a diet.
gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free for the first
Yeah,
3 weeks.
yeah.
So what does that leave?
Uh-huh. It leaves all the proteins.
Mm,
It leaves the root vegetables and leafy green vegetables. And when you go to your fruit, the low glycemic fruit, like mostly it's berries, berries, lemons, and limes. So I'm not I just eat what I want to eat, so I'm not a chef.
right.
In the actually the sugar book that I'm updating right now, oh yeah, I'm putting the recipe set that's in my yeast book. You've mentioned it a couple of times, and um, we're not really promoting that book as much. You can put it in the show notes because the FDA doesn't like me talking about my products in books. Can you believe
Right.
it? I'm
Yes.
not allowed. You've noticed I haven't mentioned any of my product names. It's very unfortunate. We can't tell people how to get healthy, but there are recipes in the not to be mentioned yeast book, and I guess you see in my mind, I see a bunch of food in my refrigerator and say, oh, I'll do this. Whereas some people, they do need a recipe, they need guidance. I understand it. So I don't know what to say other than you get a protein, you root vegetables, green leafies. I do things like I'll make my mayonnaise out of macadamia nuts, lemon juice, salt, and garlic. I'll spin that up, and that's my nice, tangy, very savory mayonnaise. And I'll mix that up with tuna or salmon that are wild caught. And I'll put that as the base of my salad and then throw in incredible produce from, I have an organic biodynamic farm here. And a salad every day would be helpful. A couple of boiled eggs. We at our Costco we're getting organic free-range chicken now.
Mm.
So I'll just I'll slice up strips of the chicken thighs and I'll poach them in coconut cream with curry a curry that I make.
God, I'm
And
gonna have to give that a try. You're making me hungry.
And that on, you can get tortilla wraps made with almond flour. And so almond you can use in the yeast-free diet. So you've got strips of coconut cream poached chicken. I'll put a couple of slices of avocado, a couple of slices of tomato, bit of salt, wrap it up and then try to manhandle it and eat it. So there's so many
There's
cool things that you
lots of
can
things. I
do.
mean, so what I'm loving at the moment is I love to have I love steak and I love eggs and I love root vegetables. I love like for example for lunch I had roasted butternut squash. I love roasted sweet potatoes. I do treat myself, so at the weekends I might have something sweet, or I eat a lot of dates as well. So I do have sugar in my diet, but what I'm absolutely loving at the moment which I think you'll like, is kimchi. I'm having that every day now. So, um, do you have anything to say about fermented foods when it comes to yeast overgrowth?
Right, I haven't mentioned that, and that is very important. We have someone here who at the farmers market she makes sauerkraut. It is important I'll put that in a salad. It's kind of I'm not that fond of sauerkraut or the taste of it. It's
Mm.
hard to eat straight, but you can throw it in your salad. And And what happens with fermented foods, you have to be careful. I remember I got into a whole thing of I'm going to make my own sauerkraut, and I did, and then I choked down a few ounces, and it really rumbled up my stomach. So when you start fermented foods, you have to start slowly.
Mm.
And I mean, it's the way that we naturally got our probiotics, back in the day, because a lot of our food had to be fermented for to be preserved. That was the way they kept foods, and that's how they kept their gut healthy. And we got away from all that, of course.
Mm.
So fermented foods are important, and
They're great
they're
for crowding out the bad bacteria, right? So the yeast that is overgrown, the
right,
probiotics are good for kind of crowding it out and just kind of pushing it to the side and kind of allowing the good guys to grow. Have
right.
you heard of Dr. Terry Walls?
Oh yes, yeah,
Yes. So she was on the podcast a long time ago, and I'd love to have her back on actually because she was just so great. And
mhm,
she recommended with foods, she recommended starting with a tablespoon or even
mhm,
a teaspoon a day just to kind of get your gut used to it because some people can have a bad reaction if the back it can really kind of upset the balance in their stomach, the bacterial balance. But
yeah,
then she says, but build yourself up over time and even having like up to a cup a day she recommends because obviously she's dealing with people who have want to reverse their autoimmune conditions and so she's got a real mission with her diets and
yeah,
fermented foods but if you just start with like a teaspoon a day and build up, that's what
right.
she would recommend.
I'm just going to interject here. You mentioned autoimmune
Yeah.
because what I've said for decades is autoimmune is likely yeast overgrowth and mineral deficiencies, especially magnesium.
Interesting. Interesting.
So with autoimmune, why I get to that theory is a doctor that I worked with, Dr. Ari Vujdani. He set up my lab up in Toronto to test for yeast antibodies and food allergens. And what he discovered is that the yeast toxins will cross-react with just about any tissue in the body. So that is an autoimmune disease when something is attacking your own body tissues. And for the allopathic medicine to look at that picture of autoimmune and say, oh my gosh, we've got to stop this attack. And they give steroids, cortisone, prednisone, and those will grow more yeast and cause more problems. So I've really had good results with patients and now customers where they're told they have this strange autoimmune disease. And there used to be a handful of autoimmune diseases, and now there's probably 100. And that's because different body tissues are cross-reacting with toxins. And the toxins, I'm saying from yeast and maybe also from the omega-6 fatty acid seed oils, which we know are pro-inflammatory, or just from the glyphosate in our agriculture that really causes a lot of problems and also binds minerals and makes them unavailable. Glyphosate has ruined farming for the health of the population.
What would you recommend to somebody who doesn't have a yeast overgrowth, but it's so common and they just want to prevent it? So, is there something they can do seasonally or something they can do that's safe that can be like an assurance, like insurance, that they don't get the yeast overgrowth? So, can they take, for example, which supplements would you recommend to prevent it and to just manage the yeast over the year, let's say?
Well, I think you've already brought it up with the fermented foods.
Okay.
I really do.
So fermented foods is the strongest
Yeah, yeah,
defense.
right. Because they do crowd out the yeast. They do give your gut that that sense of, oh, I've got a few hundred probiotics. And that's another thing about probiotics. There are so many bacteria in our gut, trillions, but different species. You cannot just take a lactobacillus probiotic and think, okay, I'm fine. No, it's got to be food-based. I'm waiting right now for a probiotic culture, and they claim to have dozens of different probiotics that come from a source. What do they call it? They do it with sourdough bread. You have the mother, the mother,
Starter, sourdough starter.
yeah, a starter.
Yeah.
And that's what I want. I'm going to put it in my coconut water and make a probiotic drink
Mm.
because I tend not to drink milk, so I don't want to do a kefir. So I'd say if you get into your kimchi, sauerkraut, some kefirs even, but you do have to watch the labels if you're buying something. If
Mm.
it's a kefir drink, how much sugar does it have? Because the sugar's going to feed the yeast. So yes, try to be food-based to prevent yeast overgrowth.
And should everyone be taking a probiotic of some sort?
I think so, but I there used to be a probiotic that I used that really seemed beneficial for me, but then they went out of business. It's
Mm.
so hard. And it was soil-based. I think you have to look at soil-based probiotics. And that's where instead of getting a separate probiotic for my protocol, I put full humic fulvic in my antifungal combination because humic fulvic it's soil that's well, vegetation that's been buried under millennia of debris so that it breaks down, as I said, with the different funguses and the bacteria and whatnot. And they contain so many soil bacteria, apparently, and I've seen the benefits of it. So I stick with humic fulvic at this point.
Okay, that's good to know. And just one final question about natural antifungals. So we hear labels being thrown around like oregano oil, caprylic acid. Are they beneficial to take?
Well, oregano oil is very strong. It actually, in my research, it acts like an antibiotic. It'll kill good bacteria as well, apparently.
Wow.
So that's why I went to silver. Caprylic acid I used to recommend, and it just wasn't, quote, strong enough. But there's
So
a lot
caprylic acid isn't strong enough. Oregano oil is almost too strong.
strong. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So I got away from both of those. Of course, over the years, I've recommended all these things, but it wasn't until I did the research on Saccharomyces boulardii that I thought, okay, with that and the silver, the humic fulvic, and something else in my inulin, I put together that formula, and it just works amazingly. But it does require you to be a bit conscious of your diet.
Yeah.
So you're taking responsibility and not taking a drug. And when you look at the antifungals on the market, a lot of them are fluoride based. I can't remember the one that I was, because I was treating yeast up in Toronto. A drug company approached me with a new antifungal and they offered me, some ridiculous sum of money to give this drug to my patients and keep records. And of course, I refused. And years later, when I looked at the fluoride in drugs, I saw that this antifungal had fluoride attached to it to make a drug more easily cross the fat cell membrane. So
Mm.
we've got like Prozacs and we've got inhaled anesthetics and surgery. We've got uh, antihistamines. We've got so many statins that have fluoride attached. So Why that's a problem is that these drugs in the intestines, the bacteria, maybe the yeast, but the bacteria break down chemicals. They try to get rid of chemicals. They'll these fluoride drugs down, and the fluoride will be released, and then that fluoride will bind to magnesium, maybe other things as well. But I'm most concerned about magnesium. It binds to magnesium, make the magnesium unavailable, and maybe excreted from the body, but more horribly, this material, magnesium fluoride, will attach to tendons and joints. And these, we may have talked about it before, drugs like Cipro, an antibiotic, is a fluoride drug, and it has a black box FDA warning saying that it can cause tendon rupture. So we've got a population that's taking a lot of these fluoride drugs. It became the thing to do with drugs, about 20, 25 years ago. You look at the chemical structure of the most common drugs, and most of them have fluoride.
Wow. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting to know, and good for people to look up for themselves. When it comes to yeast overgrowth, is there anything else that you think would be useful for somebody to know before we finish?
Yes, yes. I jumped over this, Tamara. You asked about foods, and yes, the garlic and onions, and we have garlic chives, we have green onions, all onions themselves. All these foods are antifungal, and you can easily put them in your diet, and that will help balance the intestinal flora and give you a lot of fiber. And it's fiber that these probiotics live off. If one of my concerns with like a carnivore diet, it doesn't have enough fiber. And
Mm.
I'm sure people are getting constipated, and maybe their internal bacteria are suffering. I When I was on the keto diet, and I still do actually take a tablespoon of psyllium seed powder every
Mm.
day. And
Right.
that certainly helps bulk up my intestines. And I think it's important to consider fiber. I
Yeah.
mean, who was it that said death begins in the colon?
Right. I usually, I think just to kind of come to what you've just said, I was on the carnivore diet for 5 weeks and I really liked it. I liked the food. My sugar cravings were an all-time low, and I felt great. My energy was great. And I really, that the carnivore community, the people that I've spoken to, I really believe that they're living their best life and they're just really enjoying the diet. For me, it wasn't what I need. So I just wanted to introduce some vegetables for God's sake. Like I just wanted to have some variation in my diet. And that's what I've decided to settle on. But I have to say, it was really good for killing cravings, and it was really good for kind of being mindful of protein and like good quality sourcing good quality animal proteins and things like that. So I think it's a really good tool to use. Like just quickly use it and then back away. I think it's a really nice kind of tool if you want to lose some weight or if you want to kind of manage your blood sugar or
With the carnivore diet, you really have to be eating the heart and the kidneys and
yeah,
the
nose
liver.
to tail. Yes.
You do have to get free range, grass fed
Yeah.
um, animal meat,
Yeah.
and it's hard to come by, and it can be expensive. I think there are carnivores that just eat muscle meat and
Mm.
they're on a carnivore diet. So, and you have to be careful. I remember maybe 15 years ago, Charlotte Gerson of the Gerson Institute, her father in Germany had a cancer cure, and it was a lot of coffee enemas and vegetarian diet and beef liver.
Mm.
And Charlotte told me that they were no longer able to get safe liver. She said even in the organic farming communities, because of whatever water they were drinking, whatever, the liver is contaminated. And we know that from fish liver. I don't use omega-3 fish liver. I use omega-3 algae
Mm.
because fish liver, beef liver, calves liver, fish livers, they're the filter for toxins. So toxins will build up in these organs, and then if we think we're eating something that's robust and healthy, it may not be the case. And you can't test every liver to see what toxins are in them. But I took that to heart when Charlotte said we can't even recommend beef liver or calf's liver anymore because we're afraid of the contamination.
So what supplement did you say you prefer? Fish supplement? Did you say algae?
Yeah,
Right.
because what makes omega-3 in fish is them eating algae. So you just go to the source. And
Okay.
yeah, it's probably a different ratio of EPA and DHA, but still it's a healthy alternative as far as I'm concerned. And when you look at nutrient amounts, Tamara, they'll do a study with a high amount of something because they want to prove a point.
Mm.
And then they'll say, well, you need this. You need 2 and 3 grams of omega-3 fish oil. But if you've if you're also working with your minerals and your vitamin D and your A and your E, which you need all of those and which are in all of my formulas because they're the basic building blocks, you don't have to do high amounts of everything. And then I stop and say, except magnesium. But even so, when you look at magnesium and calcium, I say you need equal amounts of both. I say 600 milligrams. It's a great amount. 100 years ago, we were getting 500 milligrams of magnesium in our daily diet. Now we're lucky to get 200. And that's where a lot of our health problems come from. And that's why I start with magnesium, lift a lot of symptoms. And whatever is left over in your symptoms, then maybe you do a bit of a workup and do some testing. But I really don't advise people who are starting off on their health journey to go off and get $2,000 worth of testing before they just do some basic nutrients.
Mm.
Even a hair analysis. When I had a hair analysis back in the day, oh yeah, with a mutual friend of ours, they couldn't figure out my ratios because my magnesium was so perfect that it threw off all the ratios related to magnesium. And so I say about hair analysis and any other test is they're looking at the results from a very sick population. So how can you presume that the testing you're doing is going to be normal or natural or healthy and relate to the individual? So I have
Mm.
great concerns about all the money being spent on these tests, which, they make the doctors a lot of money, but I don't know how helpful it is. And just to sidebar on the sidebar, I find allopathic doctors doing way too many tests. They've got it in their mind from, the clinic manager. Oh, yeah, you got to do this many tests. You've got to refer out. You've got to do this. It's become a business. The DEXA bone scan tests, do you know what they do with those? They're comparing 30-year-old bones to my 76-year-old bones, and they're acting like they should be the same. So every woman who gets a DEXA scan test now pretty much is told, oh, well, you have osteopenia, which is on the way to osteoporosis. You better think about taking a bone drug.
Mm.
And so maybe that'll be our next conversation.
Maybe. We've always got something that we need to go on to next, don't we? Oh, Carolyn, that was a lovely conversation. I just want to thank you so much for your time once again. What is the best way for people to follow you and find out more about yeast overgrowth and what to do next?
Right. My educational site is drcarolyndean.com. And on there, I talk my radio show, my articles, blogs, all the podcasts. Your podcast will be up there when it lands. And my store site is rnareset.com. And every Monday, I do a podcast, a radio show, live radio show. And you can find that on my website or just go to YouTube or X and look for Dr. Carolyn Dean.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Carolyn. It was fabulous. And let's do this again.
I appreciate it. And I appreciate your work. Thank you so much.